Good morning. Today's theme is about timing and moments of spiritual clarity. Yet I'm more likely to share something embarrassing than my spiritual moments of clarity. I've had some moments and written them down from time to time, and when I reread them, I realize I've forgotten most of them. But there is one moment I never wrote down until now, and I doubt I will ever forget it. This is a story of a father who dies of cancer, like so many parents, but with one difference that I will tell you about. In 2008, while visiting my dad, he showed me a red dot on his chest. "What do you think it is?" he asked, unbuttoning the middle button of his white shirt. "I don't know," I told him, and he said he would go see his doctor next week with my sister Katie. She always went with him, although he could drive and was 100% with it mentally at 82. I think he liked her company. My dad had had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for years, a disease his oncologist had said would not be the death of him if he received continued treatments. Yet suddenly he developed skin cancer that would quickly spread and was untreatable. Within a week, he was admitted to the hospital. His care was too complicated to return home with my mom. At the time, I was working in a brand new rehabilitation center as an occupational therapist, and he was transferred there at my suggestion. All the nurses and aides knew me and took extra care of him. A few called him grandfather, although they had just met him. Every morning when I came to work, I would greet him and then also pop in throughout the day. The relief on his face every time I walked in the morning was profound. The cancer had turned his skin black, covered most of his chest, and was spreading quickly. It required special medicated pads held in place with yards of ACE wrap. One morning, as the nurse was changing his bandages, the CNA assisting him became so emotional seeing the effects of the cancer, she couldn't continue. She apologized and crying left the room. I stepped in and helped my dad as the nurse applied the pads. As I held him sitting on the side of the bed, in his gown, something like a space opened. And I saw the timeline of my life leading me to that moment, and the fact that I had become an occupational therapist decades before, and that I had moved back to Portland 9 months earlier, and that I had chosen a new facility to work in with some of the best caregivers, and that this facility had an opening and was filled with coworkers who held me and my father during this time was powerful. I felt that all my life was in preparation for that one moment to care for my dad when he needed it the most. It wasn't about me, though. I was more like a tool, like a bow that had been drawn back to let an arrow go. That would fly for decades until it arrived here at this precise moment where it was needed. Sorry, I practiced this. I can't explain this, and it doesn't really make sense, but it flooded me with total conviction that all the steps in my life have been preparing me to do this one thing at this specific time and place, to take care of my dad. Some might call it realizing my dharma. I felt humbled to be part of a story I was not the author of. And like many moments of spiritual clarity, they can't be evaluated through the lens of reason, but they can be seen through the lens of the heart.
Our reading today is an excerpt from an essay called "Don't Carpe Diem," by Glennon Doyle. Everywhere I go, someone is telling me to seize the moment, raise my awareness, be happy, enjoy every second, etc., etc., etc. I know that this message is right and good, but I have finally allowed myself to admit that it just doesn't work for me. It bugs me. This Carpe Diem message makes me paranoid and panicky, especially during this phase of my life while I'm raising young kids. Being told in a million different ways to Carpe Diem makes me worry that if I'm not in a constant state of intense gratitude and ecstasy, I'm doing something wrong. I think parenting young children, and old ones I've heard, is a little like climbing Mount Everest. Brave, adventurous souls try it because they've heard that there is magic in the climb. They try because they believe that finishing or even attempting the climb are impressive accomplishments. They try because during the climb, if they allow themselves to pause and lift their eyes and minds and hearts from the pain and drudgery, the views are breathtaking. They try because even though it hurts and it's hard, there are moments that make it worth the hard. These moments are so intense and unique that many people who reach the top start planning almost immediately to climb again, even though any climber will tell you that most of the climb is treacherous, exhausting, killer, that they literally cried most of the way up. And so I think that if there were people stationed, say, every 30 feet along Mount Everest yelling to the climbers, "Are you enjoying yourself? If not, you should be. One day you'll be sorry you didn't. Trust me, it'll be over before you know it. Carpe diem." Those well-meaning, nostalgic cheerleaders might be physically thrown from the mountain. Glennon Doyle wrote that essay in 2012, and while I wasn't aware of her yet as a personality, it made an impression upon me when I found it online. At the time, I also had young children. Seneca was 3, Kai was 9, and her essay really spoke to me. In part, what she was responding to, what resonated with me, was this confluence of trends in American life, these trends that have combined to create unprecedented pressures on parenthood and, of course, on motherhood especially. A 2019 article in the New York Times describes the rise of intensive parenting and named several causes, from changing ideas about child development to economic anxiety about the next generation's likelihood of professional success. Add to this mix cultural tensions over changing American families, single-parent households, balancing family life when both parents work. And I'm sure, as most of you are aware, the United States is unique in how little infrastructure and policy support it gives to families, particularly for an economy that is so rich. So we have less time, less support, less security, and simultaneously are told that the well-being of our children requires constant enrichment. And before you know it, there you are, sitting on the floor, playing Candyland while listening to the Wiggles. I'll have you know, I enjoy my children tremendously. They are delightful. But playing Candyland is about as stimulating as watching paint dry. My parents' generation, and those before them, didn't feel this same pressure to entertain their children or to enrich every experience. And don't get me wrong, I remember feeling cherished, and there was curated magic. I remember a party a pretty awesome Muppet-themed birthday party that included a homemade pin-the-nose-on-Fozzie game and a Kermit the Frog cake that my mother painstakingly decorated herself, in which my little brother Doug pilfered before the candles were lit. But my mother's generation also had no problem saying, "Go play outside." They didn't feel like they had to play Candyland. There were other challenges, I'm sure, because every generation has them. Doyle's solution to the frustration of being given the impossible task of savoring every single moment of changing diapers and cleaning up peanut butter smears and finding last-minute lost shoes and playing Candyland is to focus on those breathtaking views that the climb affords you. She talks about the difference between chronos, clock time, mundane, one foot in front of the other, get the chores done time, and Kairos, which she describes as follows. It's God's time. It's time outside of time. It's metaphysical time. Kairos is those magical moments in which time stands still. I think of it as a micro-transcendence. Now, in ancient Greek, Kairos literally means opportune moment. The translation has a feeling of strike while the iron is hot, zeitgeist, tipping point. It's the consideration of time and setting and place and when they come together perfectly. The word kairos is used frequently in the New Testament to indicate a time when God created an opportunity, an opportune moment for his work to be done and for hearts to be opened to hear the gospel. And throughout the centuries, this word has been used in theological contexts very specifically. But I don't want to jump off that rhetorical and academic cliff with you guys here today. I do like the distinction that Doyle is making in her essay, though. There's a mystical quality to it. This kairos is a spiritual opportunity, and specifically, it's a personal spiritual opportunity to be in touch with the divine truth of life. These moments of kairos, of time outside of time, are more easily perceived in liminal times and spaces, in threshold times, in betwixt and in between times. The turning of the seasons, sunrises and sunsets, things that call our attention to the passing of time, to changes. Beauty that arrests us, that stops us in our tracks. Or when we visit a friend or a place that we know it may be the last time that we're going to see it for a while, and we're called to see them more fully, to take stock of how our lives have been enmeshed and enriched. And I do think that children are uniquely suited to spark these moments of transcendence for us, whether we are parents or godparents or aunts or uncles or neighbors, or we're just standing in line next to them at the grocery store. Children, by their very nature, by their innocence and their exuberance and the incredible pace at which they grow and change, they throw our lives into relief. They are liminal beings in an easily perceptible way. This, in part, is why bystanders are always telling mothers, sometimes fathers, to cherish every moment. They're saying, "Wow, what a breathtaking view you have. I hope you appreciate it." Doyle's essay goes on to point out, rightly, that no one was pressuring her then husband to savor every moment of his job as a software salesman. It's true. But then again, we Americans do put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find fulfillment in our work. A couple of years ago, I went on a winter solstice hike with a group of people from my church. My friend's daughter was home from college for the winter break, and she was talking about declaring a major. This young woman was an American. Her parents were Americans, but she had been born and raised in Paris, and she was now in school in New England. She said she felt so sorry for her American classmates. "My French friends are trying to figure out what job they want," she said, "whereas my American friends are trying to figure out what they want to be." I realize that this aspect of our culture is influenced by social class, by privilege, but its effects are felt deeply, I think, everywhere. Regardless of what kind of job you have, there are going to be mundane tasks. There are going to be standard forms and filing, filling the salt shakers. Even world-class musicians have to practice their scales and file their taxes. So the question is, can you make room in your day for some moments of Kairos? Or perhaps more appropriately, when you stumble into that moment of Kairos, when you're surprised out of your normal routine and you see the transcendent spiritual truth of the moment, can you recognize it? Can you pause there for a moment and savor it? So Kairos is not a state that we live in every single moment, but that doesn't mean that transcendence is not a normal occurrence. We have an assumption in our culture that transcendence is always triggered by something big, like Niagara Falls or Yosemite Valley big, climbing Mount Everest big, or if not that big, at least something out of the ordinary for you. You experience a moment of Kairos seeing the sun set over Haystack Rock at the Oregon coast, but not while sitting on your own front porch. I asked people this week if they had a moment of transcendence, and they all reached for a story that was uniquely out of the ordinary. Mark, my love, who spent time as a submariner in the Navy, recalled the feeling of coming up to the surface after weeks or months underway, and that first deep breath of fresh air. Another threshold moment. I'm not downplaying the impact of these big moments. They can be spiritual touchstones of great personal meaning. I myself had a Universalist epiphany while visiting the Sistine Chapel that is still reverberating through my life. And like most Kairos moments, it took me by surprise. Mark, who was my boyfriend at the time, was stationed in Italy with the Navy, and I tagged along with no real purpose other than to see the sights and eat pasta. I probably averaged a cathedral per week in the first couple of months, each beautiful in its own way. However, being descended from a long line of Scottish Presbyterians, I confess that while they were impressive, they are also, to me, distractingly cluttered. And after a few months, I began to feel a little blasé about seeing any more biblically themed art, even Michelangelo's. When we made plans to visit the Vatican and see the famed Sistine Chapel, I was, frankly, prepared to be underwhelmed. After all, we've all seen the reproductions, the posters of those outstretched hands hang in dorm rooms and living rooms and restaurants all over the world. But we went to Rome. And eventually, we wended our way through the Vatican and found ourselves outside the doors of the Sistine Chapel. I walked in, gazed up, and whoosh, dolly zoom. Do you know what a dolly zoom is? In film, it's when the camera is simultaneously tracking away and zooming in, or tracking toward and zooming out. It's also called a vertigo zoom or a Hitchcock zoom, because in the movie Vertigo, Hitchcock used it whenever Jimmy Stewart looked down the stairwell. But over time, filmmakers have come to use it to suggest a shift in reality or understanding, an epiphany, a moment of Kairos. When I stepped into the Sistine Chapel and I looked up at Michelangelo's masterpiece, the room, my fellow gawkers, even most of the rest of the painting on the ceiling, it all just fell away. and my vision narrowed in on that gap, that famous gap between Adam and God's outstretched hands. I felt rooted in place and connected to the whole universe. I thought, that's it. That's all any of it is. We are all of us, no matter what nationality, what religion, what station in life, what period of history we live and die in. We are all just trying to reach across that gap to the Holy Mystery, to catch a glimpse of the source, the oneness of us all. But our attempts to close that gap don't just happen on vacation. The real journey is in finding these moments of transcendence in the midst of our everyday lives. In Everything is Enlightenment, Joan Sutherland, Roshi and founder of the Pacific Zen School, explains that enlightenment is our true nature and our home, but the complexities of human life cause us to forget. That forgetting feels like exile, and we make elaborate structures of habit, conviction, and strategy to defend against its desolation. But this condition isn't hopeless. It's possible to dismantle these structures so that we can return from an exile that was always illusory to a home that was always right under our feet. She describes awakening as a push and pull toward homecoming. One evening a few years ago, I was sitting around a campfire with a group of other parents from my son's school. One of them talked about how her son, then 8 years old, had cried and cried one night a few weeks before that. He told her that he didn't know why he was so sad, but that it felt like a puzzle piece was missing from his heart. She said it was heartbreaking and that she didn't know how to comfort him. And everyone there exclaimed over how sweet and how sad this story was. And as a silence in the conversation fell, I slyly asked, "Is it a Jesus-shaped puzzle piece?" Everyone laughed, which was my intention. But privately, I had thought, well, yes, that's the human condition, to long for the Holy Mystery, to feel that you're incomplete because you are not you alone in your body, you are all of us together. At the time, saying that to that group of people would have made me feel a little too self-conscious, a little too earnest, a little too vulnerable. I feared that they would think I was about to start proselytizing, and then everyone would get uncomfortable and I would never be invited back. So with my thoughts running along that track, I made a joke of it. But it can be dangerous, this hole inside us. It calls out to be filled. And if we're asleep to its true nature, and the nature of humanity is that we are always asleep to its true nature, we may try to fill it with all sorts of other things. Drugs, or shopping, or sex, or gold stars, or escapist fiction. I don't know why that last one came to me. These Kairos moments are not about self-improvement or self-actualization. And they aren't specifically about gratitude, although that might be a side effect. They're about seeing things as they really are, interconnected and integrated, whole. They're about loving. They're about being called home to our true nature. The most meaningful glimpses that we can catch of these truths, of this love, are in our everyday lives, as we're plodding through our to-do lists amidst pizza boxes and text messages and traffic jams. Sutherland goes on to say, no matter what happens, even in the times that feel like irredeemable exile. We and everything we encounter are the inhale and the exhale of the universe's meditation. Each of us is all of us, and all of us are one vast thing. Each of us is all of us, and all of us are one vast thing. That's what we feel in Kairos time. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't have a creed that attempts to define the nature of the Holy Mystery. Instead, we have our 7 principles. And those 7 principles are based upon 6 sources. The first of those is direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder. This holy mystery takes us by surprise. It catches us unawares when we are immersed in forgetfulness. Suddenly, you're awakened to the beauty in a child's laugh, in the bare branches of a tree against a winter sky, streets that are paved with a diamond frost, or a moment of service that you feel that your life was aiming toward. And you're one with it all. The Reverend Kathleen McTeague, director of the UU College of Social Justice, says, "My spiritual practice consists of this. I think back on the events of the day and ask the question, where was God in this day?" Another way to say that might be, where was the Kairos in this day? I would like to close today with a poem from Rainer Maria Rilke, translated by Joanna Macy. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing, embody me. Flare up like flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror, just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand.